What's splashin'? Welcome to Season 5, Episode 7 of Siren Sundays with me, your host, Lashanti the Siren. This show is focused on speaking with researchers, scientists, and practitioners of environmental science and all things conservation. You are now tuning into our conservation conversation, and today's guest is none other than Stacey Moultrie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
Awesome. And as I was just telling Stacey, I am super excited for this episode. And I know I say that all the time, but this one is actually super special to me because Stacey's a legend. I've been hearing about her since I got out of undergrad. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, you want to do conservation planning? Because my title was actually conservation planner. It's like, you need to meet Stacey. She's the best at this. So I feel like I'm more excited than you guys for this, but join the ride. Stacey, if you can give just a quick introduction of who you are, what you do, and where you work for our viewers and listeners.
Okay, so my name is Stacey Moultrie. I'm an environmental planner and I work for a SEV consulting group, which is an environmental consultancy firm. But I also do grant writing, and that's under another company, HD Wells Professional Planning Services.
Awesome. And so, can you give me, and the viewers, I'm talking like it's me. I have to remember that other people are watching this too. It's not all about me. But can you give us just a brief intro of almost like your educational and experiential pass on what started you on this track and what are the things that you did along the way?
Yeah, so I'm a St. Augustine's College graduate. Yay, big grad machine. But I did I did A levels at Queen's College, and then I did A levels because I wanted to go to University of West Indies. So I actually went to Mona campus in natural sciences. And I don't know how many of your viewers are familiar with UE, but you don't pick your major until your final year. You
Really?
kind of, if you do natural sciences, you kind of mix the sciences, and then you have to pick a specialty in your final year. And I was a zoology major, and I wasn't quite sure. And I was like, okay, what does the Bahamas have? Lots of water. So I'll do marine sciences and fisheries. And that's how I picked my major. And I loved it. When I came home, I worked at Coral World for a while.
Oh,
And then I went to Dalhousie University because they have a really good master's in marine management. And that's when I got exposed to things like policy and how to develop it. And I was really excited about that. That's the first time I heard about doing environmental impact assessments and EIAs. And I actually got to do an internship with an environmental consultant firm in Nova Scotia as a part of my master's degree. And then when I came home, I worked at Environmental Health for a while, and then I went to the Bass Commission. And that was like the deep dive. That was like getting thrown in the environmental ocean. And so I learned so much when I was at Bass for those 7 years. I learned about, environmental international negotiations, biodiversity, climate change, EIAs, EMPs, biosecurity. I mean, it was just endless. And of course, conservation. And then I left. When I left Bass, I went to the Nature Conservancy. So I got to work from the NGO perspective and again learned so much. And that's when I did a lot of the conservation planning and grant writing. And after that, I worked on my own for a while, um, and with SEV, working in SEV as an environmental consultant. And I did a second master's in urban and regional planning with a specialty in sustainability at University of Florida.
nice.
And
That's
that
a lot.
took me all of that took like 20 years.
Well, it sounds like enough to fill 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what for our viewers, how would you define environmental planning?
So, an environmental planner looks at development and says, how can we do this and not impact the environment or minimize our impact on the environment? And so You're looking at development. You're looking how you can make development happen in as environmentally friendly a way as possible.
So, and you mentioned that you also did some grant writing, and just if you can kind of tie it together. So, how do grants even help with like this conservation effort and this environmental planning in the Bahamas?
Right. So, the Bahamas has a reputation of being a very rich country, but I always tell people that's relative, because the environmental sector is woefully underfunded, and needs money. And the beauty of grants is that if you get a grant, you don't have to repay it. It's not a loan. So
Right.
when you get that money, once you meet the deliverables that you were given the grant for, that's all the donors are asking for. And so a lot of that early work at the Bass Commission was actually funded by grants.
Hmm.
Yeah, we used grants to buy the equipment we needed, but we also did lots of really cool projects, um, like the developing a clearinghouse mechanism for biodiversity, the national environmental policy, the national environmental management and action plans, projects on invasive species. All of those were funded through grants. And then when you look on the NGO side, organizations like the Nature Conservancy, the Bahamas National Trust, Brief, Friends of the Environment, all of those groups can use grants to help fund conservation. So if they want to set up a new protected area, or they want to do specific activities in that protected area, or they want to pursue training for their staff or stakeholders, all of that can be funded through grants.
So basically, is it safe to say that the grants kind of laid the foundation for the Best Commission, which is now the Department of Environmental Protection and Planning?
Yeah, definitely. Because when I was at BESS, which I went there in late 2000,
Hmm.
it had only been around for a few years, and it had a really small staff. And we use grant funding to help to grow the staff, but also, like I said, to purchase equipment and do a lot of the outreach and education projects that we had. We did most of that work through grants because our actual budget from the government was really small.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, that, and I hear that all the time. The Bahamas is such a rich country that even when it comes to grants, a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, the Caribbean, except the Bahamas," and
Yeah,
they'll name a few other, and I'm
yeah,
like, but we need it. Like our like you said,
yeah,
our conservation sector is very underfunded, and grants is really what helps us get by. Grants and donations, in kind donations too,
yeah.
and they're just so important. But I know you had thrown out the terms environmental impact assessments and EMPs. Can you say what those stand for and what they are?
Okay, so an environmental impact assessment, or EIA, is where you look at a project concept, you go to the site and you say, okay, if you put this project here, these are the impacts that you're going to have on habitat, species, your neighbors, people who may live a mile away. So you look at everything that's happening in that project, and you can analyze what the impacts are going to be on those different things. And
Hmm.
in the EIA itself, you also explain, okay, these are your impacts. So, how can we eliminate or minimize those impacts? So, say, for example, you want to put small cottages on a beach. And one of your impacts may be that you're impacting the dune because of where you have them placed. So how
Hmm.
could you minimize or eliminate that impact? You move the cottages back off of the dune. And so
Right.
you have to keep the dune intact. So that's an example of what an EIA does. And the people involved in an EIA or writing it would be the various specialties. So you normally have a marine biologist, a botanist, an ornithologist. Sometimes you need somebody who knows hydrogeology or geology or some type of chemistry. So the project, the specialties may vary, but it's usually a group of scientists writing the report.
Right.
Then once the EIA is done, and the way the system works in the Bahamas is you would submit that document to DEP. They
Mm-hmm.
would say, okay, this makes sense to us. We'll let you go ahead and do the development, but now you have to write an environmental management plan. And I call the EMP the Bible for the construction workers.
Hmm.
So the EMP outlines everything that the construction and operation staff need to do to make sure that the environment is protected. So it'll have things like a health and safety plan, a hazardous waste management plan, training materials for the staff because it's unlikely that they'll know what birds to look out for and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. So all that information will be in the EMP, and they're supposed to keep it on site so that they could reference it. And then it's usually the EMP and EIA together that DAP will use to assess compliance with what they have laid out in the Certificate of Environmental Clearance.
Right. And I think what you had pointed out is so important. I think when people think of a conservationist, they think, oh, if you want to work in that sector, you need to study marine biology or terrestrial. But it's so interdisciplinary because I've even heard the term ESIA being used, which is including that social component. So a lot
Yeah.
of times, like you said, if you're building like these cottages on a beach, you now have to consider the fact that you have neighbors. How is this construction going to affect them? How is this going to affect the community and the neighborhood? So there is always the
Yeah.
environmental component, the social component, the chemistry, the geology. It's all these things working together. So I always try to tell people you'd be surprised how whatever your career is will tie back and fit into conservation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know the other thing you said, because I've heard of like obviously general management plans for protected areas, but I think what you mentioned is so important because when you put these developments somewhere, sometimes people just kind of like it's like a set it and forget it kind of thing. Whereas, you need to make sure that over time you're making sure that this environment is being monitored and you're doing it the right way based on what was assessed to begin with. And I know that oftentimes these type of documents, because you've worked in policy development, do these feed into the creating or the agitating or changing of policies in the Bahamas?
Sometimes it can. Sometimes it can. So, if you have a project and you for whatever reason may have missed a particular issue for impacts. So one of the things we're looking at now in projects which is fairly new is greenhouse gas emissions. That's not something you would have had to assess before, but the government wants to make commitments under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and those negotiations to show that we are making an effort to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So for some projects, we've had to look at that. What is the potential for greenhouse gas emissions from this particular project? And what are the policy standards that we're trying to meet? And if there aren't any, can we develop them? For that particular one, we use the National Energy Policy because they did actually make a recommendation with respect to greenhouse gas emissions and renewable energies. So it's almost like a loop and it goes around and around because the policy can impact how development happens, but how development happens can also impact policy. So,
Mm-hmm.
and you want that because you want both to constantly be improving. And so you'll find that over time, you just get these circles and the circles move out because they're both influencing each other.
And that is important because I know a lot of times when you hear about environmental policies, people also think about some of the the conventions and other things that we sign on an international basis. When it comes to our particular environmental policy, do you think a lot of those that we sign on to actually influence what we put into legislation?
Yeah, a lot of times. So when you become a party to an international environmental agreement like the Convention on Biological Diversity, you actually are making a commitment to entrench that international convention into your national law and systems. Now, we actually haven't been that great at that. We're getting better.
Oh,
But we
okay.
actually haven't been that great at that. Because some countries actually will not become a party to a convention until they pass national legislation on that issue. But the
Oh,
Bahamas has
wow.
done it the other way. We become a party and then we figure out how to do the legislation and policy. And either way can work. But that means we've lagged a bit in terms of the legislation and policy we should have. But it's not just those conventions that require policy, because yes, we need legislation and policy on biodiversity, but there are also lots of other environmental issues that may not be covered by an international convention. And so you would need policy on those as well. And just so people understand, policy is a written document that points in the direction a country wants to go. So when we write policy, we're saying this is the direction we want to move in for this particular issue. And that's important because that should keep everybody on the same page. So even if policy comes out of Department of Agriculture, Ministry of Works should look at that policy when they're making decisions and say, okay, are any of my projects going to negatively impact the direction we want to move with this agricultural policy? And that's why policy is important. Everyone should be looking at it and figuring out how can I help to make this policy happen, or at the very least, how can I not hinder the implementation of this policy?
And that's, I think, you made a really important point. And I know through just my short career, and I'm sure you've probably seen it in yours. Fortunately, even though the Bahamas is, in a way lagging a bit, we sign onto these parties and they're not implemented right away. I found that when NGOs and even some of the government agencies are writing some of these grants and these projects, they are keeping these types of policies in mind, or parties that the country is signed on to. So in a way, it's not in policy, but we're acting as if it is. So at least we're still kind of on that same progression. And so just to shift gears a bit, I know one of the biggest things that I was excited to talk to you about is your career in general. And I'm very interested about what aspect is your career through all this environmental and conservation planning has been your favorite, and why?
Um, I think the grant writing has been really, really enjoyable for me because it's one way that I could contribute as a citizen. It's sometimes it can be difficult to see what your impact is as an individual, but over 25 years, I've successfully written $47 million in grants for the Bahamas. So I
Oh
can
my.
say that's my contribution to my country.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been rewarding for me to be able to help the government and NGOs to do the projects that they want to do. The other part of my work that I really enjoy that isn't technical at all is getting to see the Bahamas and
Mm-hmm.
getting to see places that a lot of people may not see. I get to go on remote keys where nobody lives
Mm-hmm.
and see the type of habitats and animals that are there. And the Bahamas is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I think we take it for granted because we live here,
Mm-hmm.
but from key to key, from island to island, is a different adventure. And the people are different. The food is different. Is when you travel to Bahamas is almost like going on a world tour. Because it's every place is so different and you learn something new everywhere you go, and I love that part of my job.
Definitely. And I think as a conservation planner in my last organization, that was one of my favorite things. I enjoyed, of course, the impact you get from being a part of these grants and these projects, but it really opened my eyes to just how amazing the Bahamas is and how we have so much more than just these beaches. Like all we do is push the beaches. But I every
Mhm.
time I visit an island and people are like, oh, well, what on that island? And I start naming all of the things that I saw, what I've experienced, even just like you said, the food. I feel like each island has their own unique like dish. It's one of those things that just really gives you a greater appreciation for the work you do. Even so, we do have a question in the audience, and I'm actually curious about this one because I was a little like, "Wow!" when you said it. How was it working at Coral World? What did you do when you was there? I have vague memories of this place as a child, and I wish that it still. I wish it survived. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, me too. It was a really cool place that unfortunately didn't survive. I can't remember which hurricane it was, but one of the hurricanes destroyed a lot of the aquariums. But I was a docent. So basically, a docent is a guide. So when guests would come, I would give talks about the animals that were in the aquarium, but I was also responsible for animal care. So prepping their food and feeding them, cleaning their tanks. Cleaning the shark tanks was always that was my cardio because I used to be terrified. But no, that was a great experience because before that, I'm an introvert. So even though I've been
Really?
doing it for years, I get really nervous talking to people. So that helped me to get out of that because I had to give talks to strangers every day. And so that was a good experience for me because it helped me get over my shyness. But yeah, no, I learned a lot on that job too.
Yeah, it was a great place. And like I've said, I do miss Coral as well. Um, and another question that I wanted to ask, because I know that in the sector, so I'm sure people listening in the sector are going to kind of understand where I'm going with this, but even for our viewers, a lot of times when you get into conservation in the Bahamas, whether you go private, NGO, government, or you just do one of the two, or one of the three, or two of the three, oftentimes you find conservation professionals branching off into a consultancy or just being an independent consultant. And just from your experience and maybe your career specifically, do you feel like this is almost like a natural progression in the sector to just once you get the experience from organizations, you just
Yeah.
shift and do your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people do that because let's face it, when you work for government or NGOs, you don't make a lot of money.
It's the
You
passion.
don't. Yes, it's about passion. But as you get older, so you may have children, and those children need to go to college. And so you begin to think about, okay, how can I increase my income? And do I have the skill sets to be a consultant? Because being a consultant isn't easy by any means. It's a lot of ebb and flow. So sometimes you have work, sometimes you don't. So some people may never get into it because it can be risky. But if you want to set your own schedule, work on the projects that you like to work on, because you can tell clients, no, I'm not interested. You have the ability to do that as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to have time for your family, as well as enough income to send your kids to college, then going into consultancy is usually the route that some people take. Now, some people will go into academia, and if you progress in that can be rewarding as well as financially lucrative.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also depends on the organizations you work for. You know, some people get to work for the larger NGOs, they call the
Bingos.
bingos, and they pay really well. So it depends on the person. I think to be a consultant, you have to be a bit of a risk taker, especially starting out,
Mm-hmm.
because it is scary, and you have to be a good planner because again, you have to be able to survive those ebbs and flows.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you have downtime, there's still money to pay the bills.
Right. And I'm so happy. An audience member actually asked the question I was going to ask next because you said you've been able to bring in 47 million through grant writing to contribute to the Bahamas. And of course, we're so thankful because conservation has benefited a lot from having you. So, what are some of the most important parts of successful grant writing?
So with grant writing, you have to do your homework in terms of you have to know what the donor is looking for, and you have to be clear about that. Because if you write a grant that doesn't align with what the donor wants, you're going to get rejected. So that's the first thing. Make sure that what you want to do and what the donor wants to give money to align. And then you have to make the case. And you have to make the case well. And one of the things I tell people is you have to put your absolute best foot forward. People have gotten rejected because they had spelling errors or grammatical errors or something was wrong with the formatting. So not only does your project have to align, your writing has to be really good. And I have to thank all of my English teachers from high school because
Stack.
they were and they helped me to be a really good writer because that's so important.
Mhm.
And another important aspect of grant writing that a lot of groups struggle with is the finances. So
Mhm.
you have to be able to know how to develop a budget, and you also have to figure out how to cost things and pull that into your grant. So you mentioned in-kind donations. So even with in-kind donations, when people are volunteering their time, you have to know how to put a dollar value to that because that has to be costed and put into the grants. So it's grant writing is basically an amalgamation of English and math and accounting. And if you could do those three things well, you could be a good grant writer.
So I know I've heard, and just hearing people talk about, oh, how to write grants, and even this book that I'm reading, they say it's better, I guess these days. I don't know if in the past it was different to almost kind of write your grant as if it's a business proposal. Like, how is this going to benefit you, and how are you not going to have to give me any more money? Almost, you know. Would you agree
Well,
with that?
yeah, it's there are certain basic things that you have to put in every grant. So you always have to have a project description, you always have to have a budget and a work plan. And almost every single grant asks you to describe who is this project going to benefit. And it can't be just you. It has to be other people outside of your organization.
Yeah.
Um, but the templates can vary widely in
Mhm.
terms of what people ask for. And so that's the other important thing. Before you start writing the grant for a specific donor, make sure you understand each section of the template that you need to fill out because you can't leave anything blank. What some organizations will do is they have like grant summary proposals. So they'll document every project that they want to do for that year. So they have a summary for that. And then once they find the donor that aligns with a particular project, then they'll use that summary to help them to fill out the specific donor template. But templates vary. So
Mhm.
I wouldn't recommend anybody write a full grant proposal without looking at a template because you may actually be working on sections that you don't need to, or you may not be working on a section that you need. And so, just a simple 2, 3 page project summary is good to start with a budget. And then once you target a particular donor, then you follow the template that they give you.
So I know you mentioned that some organizations will do that project summary first and then wait to look for a donor. I've also heard that there another tactic would be find a grant, like find a donor and just try to just create something that'll be, that'll fit into that so that you can start getting some money coming in. With for very early organizations in their career, is in their lifeline, I guess. Is that a technique that you would recommend, or is it go with the project summaries and then find a good
You have
match?
to you have to be careful taking that approach that you're not fishing for stuff that you're not interested in or can't do.
Mhm.
I never encourage people to go after a grant just to have money if that grant doesn't align well with what they want to achieve. So let's say I'm an environmental NGO and I hear about a grant for ocean OTEC. doing research on ocean technology energy conversion, where you take in water from deep and it's the heat exchange that generates energy. I'm interested in teaching farmers how to be more environmentally friendly. Should I go after that OTEC grant? Do I have the skill set for that? Yes, $100,000, but can I actually do that project? And so you have to be very careful. I think you have to have at least some basic idea of what you want to achieve in any given year, and then look for grants that match with what you want to do. Because if you go after a grant that you either don't have the skill set for or don't have a support system to help you implement, you're going to fail. And failing to deliver on a grant is really bad, because not only will you not be able to get a grant from that particular donor again, they talk to other donors
Mm.
and you may not get a grant from anybody else.
Hmm.
And so know what your objectives are first. That's what I encourage people to do. And then go after the grants that align with that. Don't chase grants that you're not really focused on, about issues that you're not really focused on, because it'll be a headache and it's just not worth it, even if you're getting money coming in.
Definitely. So, what advice do you think you would give to young Bahamians who are interested in a similar career path? You know, they got the good English and they want to really help to it's basically generating more income for the conservation sector. What advice would you give them as far as pursuing a career in environmental planning?
Um, it's so broad in terms of the sciences that you can study, that I wouldn't really recommend any particular science. Once you're studying a natural science that allows you to get some experience in the field on collecting data, and the methodologies that you use to collect and analyze data, that's a win. But after that, it's volunteering if you have to with organizations, so you get some field experience, because not always are you able to find the job that fits you perfectly. And so don't be afraid to volunteer, or work in an area where you may not get everything you need, but you get some experience. And then it's just taking advantage of learning opportunities. I mean, nowadays there are so many free courses or information that's on the internet, that if you want to learn about writing grants, you can find a course for that. If
Mm.
you want to learn about how to prepare an EIA, you can find a course for that. And so, a lot of what I did, I made sure that I did, was take advantage of as many training opportunities as possible. The Bahamas is small, and it's very seldom that you can find work in an area that that's the only thing you do for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Most Bahamians have multiple skill sets that they use at different times.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to get as many skills as you can, or learn as many skills as you can, so that if one door closes, you could go through another one. And so with my training on the job as well as through courses, I learned how to do EIAs. I learned how to do grant writing. And so I use those two skills to move forward in my career. For some people, it may be, bird identification and geographic information systems. So they know how to identify birds and they know how to generate maps using GIS. So I always encourage people to have at least two skill sets. And that way, if one doesn't work out, you could go to the other one, and bounce back and forth over those. And then, I mean, you could be working in a field for 10 years and you come across a subject area that you never heard of, that you would be interested in learning more about. I think we get caught up in this. I have to do this by the time I'm 25. I have to do this by the time I'm 30. No, your path can be as straight or as winding as you want it to be. And don't be afraid to try new things. Uh, I'm a risk taker. Not everybody is, but I believe in jumping in and facing your challenges and your fears. And so I don't think I'd ever be a person who would be in the same job for 20 years. And I'm not knocking people who do that, but I think the way the world functions now, you have to be able to adapt and you have to not be afraid to do that, and learn new skills whenever you can.
Mhm. So, and something you had said earlier when you mentioned try to have at least two skill sets that you're really good at, it made me think of a question. And if you can't answer, I think you'd be able to, though. In your opinion, do you feel like when pursuing a career in conservation of the environment, or maybe just any sort of career, is it better to go in the route of being a generalist, where you know a little about a lot, and maybe there's that one thing that you're very good at, or just specialist and you just focus on your one thing and you try to be the best at that?
Um, Either path can work depending on the person. For me, I needed to be a generalist slash. So the generalist is the bigger part of the pie, and then the specialist is the smaller part. Because I did do marine sciences and fisheries,
Hmm.
so that's my specialization. But I know a lot about different environmental sciences. I know a lot about environmental legislation and policy. Um, and that helps when you're doing like big projects because then you can pull from all those different skill sets. And even if you don't know, you know the people who know, that
Yeah,
kind of
understand.
way. But it's always good to know a little bit about everything environmental related. So even if you don't study it in school, read about journal articles, read the national plans for the Bahamas related to the environment. Um, Read some of the historical publications about what the country used to be like. So sometimes I'll just go online and look for journal articles about the Bahamas and read them. It's so much that a single individual doesn't know. And so this constant learning, I encourage people to do that.
Definitely. And to your point, I think that network is so important. Just even if you aren't great at something, just by kind of tapping into that. And I'm sure, even like you mentioned with the environmental impact assessments, you have a marine biologist, you have a botanist, you have someone who does geology, and you have these people. So you can follow along in the conversation, but they're the
Yeah,
ones that are going to tackle that part. So conservation is also very interdisciplinary, like I said earlier, and it's always a group effort. We're all in this together. We're really just
right.
trying to push forward. But can you tell us what are some of the things that you are currently working on, and
Mhm.
how can people start doing things now to benefit conservation in the Bahamas?
So I'm one of the biggest projects I'm working on is actually for the government on the third national communication and the biennial update report on climate change.
Hmm.
And basically, I'm partnered with University College London, and we're working on a few of the chapters. One is research and systematic observations, and a big part of that contract is training. So we're doing 5 modules to train Bahamians about research and systematic observations for climate change and the different models and tools that are available globally, and some that we might want to apply here. In terms of advancing conservation, anything you could do to support local NGOs like the Bahamas National Trust, whether that be by becoming a member, brief friends, all of those groups have membership fees and they use those fees to help them do work. You could volunteer to help with activities. If you're able, you can make a cash donation if you have that type of income. Um, just and also just being aware. We have a lot of national parks and marine reserves all across the country. And if you make it your business to know where those areas are and where the boundaries are, if you see something, say something. I know they say that about crime,
Yeah.
but you also say that about conservation. If you see someone doing something in a protected area that shouldn't be happening, or if you see something, in nature going wrong, and you think, hey, is this something that's going to impact these species? Then you can reach out to those organizations. Most of them are woefully understaffed, and they don't have bodies to be permanently stationed in each protected areas. And these areas are held in trust for the Bahamian people. So there are areas, so we need to take some ownership of that and be stewards for those areas as well. So anything you could do to help manage those areas, even if that's just knowing where they are and making sure like your neighbors don't go drive the truck with their garbage and dump it there, and speaking up for the environment. The environment can't talk for itself. So we have to have people who advocate on their behalf, and we can't just say, "Oh, BNT is gonna do it," or Brief is gonna do it, or Lashanti is gonna do it. We should each make it our responsibility if it's only for the areas that are close to where we live.
That's powerful. I know in the project you just mentioned, are there those opportunities and those trainings? Is that something that people can watch any of your pages for? Like, is there going to be a training that's coming out soon for anyone to sign up for, or will that be just a focus group of people?
Well, for right now, it's just focus, but the intent is that those courses will be available for free on Moodle.
Awesome.
And by the end of the project, anybody could go on and take the courses and participate. And so, yeah, initially it's a small group of people. Most of them either in the field in government or in NGOs, but it's going to be made publicly available so that people can take advantage of it.
That's exciting. So, just as we wrap up the episode, just a final thought for viewers: is there like a life lesson that you learned along your career path that you'd want to share?
Wow, I learned so many. I am old. Um, I guess the biggest lesson I learned is actually from my mom. She taught me from I was a little kid, that knowledge is power. And she would always say, the knowledge you have in your head, nobody could take that away from you. And I've actually propelled that into a career. I use my brain to
Yeah,
do my work. And so anything that feeds your mind is a good thing. And you can use your mind to change your life. And so knowledge is power.
I love that. You can change your mind to change. You can teach your. Say it again. You can teach your mind to change your
Feed
life.
your mind and
Feed.
change your life.
I love that. I love that. And last one. Is there someone in the sector, whether local or international, that inspires you, and why?
So there's not just one person. There are lots of people, especially young people like you,
I'm in the crowd.
Kuranda, Bradley, it's so Marjan, it's so many young people doing such great and exciting things that I look at you and I'm like, okay, can't give up yet. Because working in the environment and conservation, sometimes you feel defeated
Mm-hmm.
because you push and you want people to do what's right for the environment. And sometimes you get disappointed. But when you look around you and you see people, enthusiastic about issues and doing things in their sphere to try to make a change, that's inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to give a shout out to David Dean. He's a new birder that I met.
Oh,
Um, and he is just so excited about birds, but he makes me want to learn about birds. And so just all the young people who are in the field, who are vocal and active, you inspire me. Thank you.
I do love a passionate person, and I've met, like you said, there are so many people right now in the Bahamas, young and old, or young and seasoned rather, that are very inspirational, and I have a lot of optimism and hope for the future of conservation in the Bahamas. But this has been such a great episode. I'm so grateful that I was able to get the Stacey Moultrie on Siren Sundays, a conservation legend, a Bahamian conservation legend. And I've been so happy to have you. Do you have any final words for our viewers?
No, just thank you. Everybody just, keep working. We can get it. We can get it right. We can
We
get
can
it
get
right
it.
at some point. So we just have to keep going.
Forward, upward, onward together.
Yep.
There you
Yep.
go.
That's it.
Awesome. So thank you everyone for watching. Hope to see you guys tune into the next episode. Have a great Sunday.
Bye, everybody.